So it's wonderful to be here with you today, Pim. Well, you are a provocateur, a pioneer, a protagonist in all things modern organizations. You are shaking up the world in a brilliant way in your various roles. I guess starting as a researcher, author, community builder with your brilliant corporate rebels movement that's gone global and more. And of course, you are now a transformational investor and consultant. You are practicing what you preach. You're actually doing it for real. We're going to delve into those topics, of course, and particularly around how do you create, sustain, and make profitable, in every sense profitable, self-managed organizations. But before we do, let me welcome you to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Lovely introduction. Good start.
So if you haven't heard of you, which how dare they, or your movement, just give us a nutshell of a primer of a self-managed organization. What are the features? And how does it differ from perhaps a traditional incumbent that many of our listeners may still be working in?
Yep. Yeah, so a self-managed or progressive organization, or however you want to call it, is a company that doesn't have many of the frustrations that traditional companies do. So no managers telling you what to do and when to do it. Not too many rules and policies that dictate how you should behave. And instead, there is often an environment where people have autonomy, where they can develop themselves, where they have a sense of meaning and purpose to what they're doing, and where work is just a more fun, more passionate thing for people to do. So these are organizations that are very, very different from what we're seeing in 99.9% of companies.
Mm-hmm. And what I've also seen and experienced from some of my clients, they're not just great places to work. They're very successful on any form, any measure of success. Because some people think, oh, that sounds very nice, very cuddly, very fun, oh, wonderful. That's like a holiday. But actually, they're not. They are properly impressive and high performing, right?
Yeah, and it's quite common sense, I would say, that if people love their job, if they love their work environment, that they also perform better. But this is true. So research shows this time and time again that if people are more motivated, more engaged, the results of the company are very likely to be better as well. So yeah, we're seeing this very much. If companies transition well from a traditional management setup to a very progressive setup, they see all sorts of benefits arising from it. So higher engagement, more motivation, people sticking around for longer, less sick leave, a lot more productivity, profitability can go up. But there is a very big if, which is if they do it well. So it doesn't mean that if you go into self-management, you're always going to be more successful, because you need to get some of the basics right. And I think a lot of people are misunderstanding what non-hierarchical organizations are like. And hopefully we can shine a bit of light on that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it a more demanding environment? I mean, it sounds like you can have more fun, but it also sounds, more transparency, fewer rules, greater accountability. I mean, that sounds like a higher bar.
Yeah, and it's actually good to talk about this, because many times when, for example, in newspapers or television, you see an item on bossless organizations, then people always love to talk about the fact that there's no bosses, no rules. You can decide many things for yourself. And this is the good thing about it. But there is, like you say, also another side to it, which is really challenging. There's high level of responsibility, high levels of accountability, full transparency. So it's not an easy environment, but it is for many people a more rewarding one.
I mean, I guess it's more, I remember writing about this. I don't claim much credit because I haven't done anything near as much as what you have, but around sort of outcomes, a more orientation around outcomes-based organizations. So in a way, they can do everything you've described, but they've still got to deliver the results.
Yep.
And I guess coming back, linking to that, the corporate center, in many of these traditional organizations, they are big bastions of bureaucracy, inflated. I mean, who knows what happens really there apart from long committee meetings and so forth. In the model you just described, how is what I would traditionally call the center or the corporate center, how is that redefined? What does it do now?
Yeah, so what we see mostly in these organizations when they move away from this kind of traditional hierarchical setup, the CEO on top, lots of management layers, and they are often then distributed into functional departments, functional silos, where often they're not talking really well with each other. You see so many problems arising from that. And these companies that move away from that, they break down that hierarchy and they decentralize the company to a large extent, where they want those decentralized teams to have much of the decision-making power. So they kind of break that center up into like lots of smaller entities within the organization, and give them a lot of space, a lot of autonomy to do their part of the work according to how they see things. So there's a lot less focus on giving directions from the top. There is a very clear idea of where the company wants to go, and that most of the time still comes from a top management or a senior leadership team. But then there's a whole network of all kinds of multidisciplinary teams in many cases that are fully responsible for a certain part of the business. So a certain client or, for example, a certain region or product. And then they run that team as if it's a separate business. So there's full autonomy or near full autonomy in those decentralized teams.
And I guess they have clarity about the contribution they're expected to make over a period of time to the overall entity.
Yeah, and this is where the power of transparency comes into play. If you have this network of teams, it's very important for those teams to understand how they are performing. If there's a lot of similar teams in the organization, it's easy to see how you're performing compared to others. So many of these progressive companies have sort of league tables where they can see how certain teams are performing compared to others on a couple of basic important benchmarks. And this is key, right? If you want people to self-manage and self-organize, you also need to understand how are we actually doing? How are we performing? And if we're underperforming, what can we learn from teams that are higher performing, and the other way around? If we are doing very well, how can we support other teams in the organization to step up? So this transparency is vitally important. These organizations need it, because if you just create a lot of autonomy at the fringes, then you don't give people the right information, then that can easily lead to chaos.
If you've grown up in the old world, if you like, or the less progressive world, clouded in secrecy, lots of bad politicking, lots of bureaucracy, very, very little transparency, and the list goes on and on. What you've described is a radical shift, which would, frankly, I would think some people wouldn't want it. That all the skills they've developed wouldn't apply in those situations. Some might, you'd hope, and the higher performers might. But I also imagine it would be both a source of inspiration and anxiety in making that transition. How would you, if somebody had read your book, been part of your community, been to one of your amazing events and masterclasses, plug. Where would they? And they thought, we need to do it right now. Where would you start if you were one of the people? I was going to say at the top, but that's the wrong phrase. If you were, say, a divisional lead or a divisional manager, so you had some autonomy and perhaps you had a P&L yourself. Where would you start in making a shift towards this?
Yeah, so maybe we can quickly take a look at the playbook that we use when we buy a company and then transform it into self-management. So at Corporate Rebels, as you said, we're very much about doing the research, sharing all kinds of examples of progressive companies and building a movement around it, a community of like-minded organizations. And then we have another business, Chrysos, which is a private equity fund. And there we buy traditionally managed companies. And once we acquire them, they go through a very radical transformation. We strip the hierarchy away. We implement full financial transparency, full salary transparency. People make decisions together instead of managers doing it for them. So it's a very, very different setup, and we put into practice all the stuff that we've seen in the past 10 years at Corporate Rebels. What you see there, if you look at that playbook that we use, there at first, before even starting a transformation or before even buying a company, we want to make sure that the people in the company actually want to go down this route. So the first thing we do is shut down operations for 2 days, explain what our transformation approach is like, talk about the pros and the cons to really give a clear and honest picture of what that transformation will look like. And then people get to vote. So after 2 days, it's up to them to say, yes, we want to be acquired by Chrysos or we don't. And only if 80% of the people vote in favor of this transformation, we go ahead with the acquisition. If less than 80 vote in favor, then we don't do it, because we don't believe in forcing people into a certain direction. And we want to have a certain amount of people believing that this is actually the right
And are these
direction for
owner
them.
managed? Give us a sense of the types of business. Are they owner managed businesses? So the people, the 80%, they have a share in the business already, or their staff?
No, they're staff. So everybody in the company gets to vote. So the owner is not included because they sell the company to us. We become the new owner, so they're out of the
Yes.
picture. But all the other people, whether they are managers or regular employees in the company, doesn't matter. Everybody gets an equal vote. And you can imagine what happens there, right? So if people get to vote, in many cases, we see a couple of people voting against a transformation like this. And in almost all cases, these are former managers.
Yes.
Yeah, because there's a lot to lose for them. So that's, of course, what we have to take into account into the transformation process. But it really kicks off with this. And I think if you're leading a division, coming back to your question, what is important is to first figure out, do people actually want to go into this direction? And in order for people to get excited about this, you probably need to do a bit of prep work yourselves to understand, okay, what are we actually going to do? What does it look like? And it doesn't mean a detailed plan for the years to come, but it does mean a clear vision of where you would like to take that division and what that might look like. And even though you maybe don't have to go into too much practicalities, you at least want to nail the vision so that people can actually buy into it.
Mm. I love the clarity and the simplicity, and that's a compliment of what you just said. And am I right in saying, I mean, you haven't been prior to this a consultant or a private equity owner, so and there'll be consultants and private equity people and others listening to this, I hope, thinking, this guy, so he's written a great book, he's developed a movement, I mean, a great pioneer, I mean, many plaudits, and he's just sort of set this up, and he's doing transformation on steroids, legally, of course. Just tell me just a little bit personally, your role in this and how you sort of rolled your sleeves up from close to a standing start, not in terms of the methodology and the approach, but actually doing it for real. I mean, it's very impressive.
Yeah, but here's how we make our own lives a bit easier. Is we work with people who've done these transformations for a very long time. So we are co-owners of the business together with a couple of people who've done these transformations for decades. So we can just build on their experience. We are not the ones, so Joost and myself, the co-founders of Corporate Rebels, we are not the ones actually going into these companies, running these transformations. That's where we have really good experienced people for. So I think that is important for us to be able to.
You know your role, right? I mean, in a sense, you have the. I'll simplify. You have the design, and obviously you created the buzz, the interest, and the movement. But you know when to bring in others who complement those skills, which again I think is a big strength.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well in this because it requires, at least with the speed and the quality that we'd like to do these transformations in, so because we want to get to results within the first 2 years. And then we have to really good results in the first 2 years. And then we still want to make sure that the company continues on this trajectory. But the first 2 years are really vitally important to quickly make a transition and quickly start seeing results. That's why we believe we have to work with people who've done this before.
Yeah.
And it's key to making this work.
And your model is an exit after the 2 years or beyond? That's the
beyond. So a full timeline for the fund is 10 years. So we have an investment period of 4 years, then transforming and then exiting the companies. So per company, it's about 2 years transformation, 2 years of handover, and then the exit anywhere between year 4 to 6.
And the size of companies?
Anywhere between 40 and 150 people. Right. And ideally, managed very traditionally. So the more traditional, the more upside there is for us.
Bigger the upside. Yeah. So imagine you, just bringing this back then, if you imagine you had been pioneering these approaches and perhaps you'd started in one team, perhaps you hadn't been gone through the transformation you described, but you'd done it in one team. You thought, look, we really need to scale this across the organization. But hey, our organization is disparate across geographies, different cultures, different products, services, and so on. How do you scale effectively?
Yeah, so we do this a bit easier, right? So you're the owner and people are excited about this transformation. So it's a different story. But if you would work in a bigger company and you're just one team that has found a way to transform certain elements, you cannot go as radical as what we prefer to do because you cannot change, for example, the salary structure or the hierarchical structure or the org design. So you got to start smaller with how you run your meetings, how you make decisions, how you create transparency in your team, how you organize work into more fluid roles. All this stuff you can start on a team level. And then it's about figuring out, okay, how can we get other teams excited about what we're doing? We've seen this in many organizations where the transformation is not so much top down, but more bottom up. And then it's really about building a movement internally. And what's important there is building your case really well. So what have you transformed? What are the results or what is the performance of your team before that transformation? What is it after the transformation? Share a lot of stories of how people enjoy this new way of working and how it benefits them. And this will really bring others in the organization, in many cases at least, to jump on your movement. And then one by one, start supporting these teams to join you on your transformation journey. And I think it's very comparable to how societal change tends to happen. It doesn't so much come from the top down by elected representatives. It becomes much more from the bottom up, and certain things, they just catch on because it's better for people. And the same we see happening in organizations.
How far could this go? Could you go in terms of the scale of organizations? I mean, I imagine people listening and watching will think of their organization or other ones they're perhaps a citizen of or a consumer of, and think, God, these are the multi-billion-dollar or pound or euro organized. They really need a big dose of this, don't they? How far could it go?
How far you mean in terms of how big are the companies that can do this?
Well, so you referred to sort of up to 150 people. Imagine a multi-billion organization. I think Bayer is experimenting with this at the moment. I'm sort of thinking, why not? Why shouldn't it? Yes, it will be more complex, and you talked about salary structures will take, incentives will take longer to unpick. But why shouldn't it? I'm curious about your own ambition to go into that space.
Yeah, so it's not our ambition to go into this because we believe there's much more power in transforming hundreds of thousands of small, medium businesses than in just a couple of really big ones. I do applaud, by the way, what companies like Bayer and Haier in China are doing in terms of completely reinventing how they work, because they draw a lot more attention to it than just a couple of small, medium-sized businesses. But I think the actual power is in changing these smaller companies and very many of them. But based on our research, we see that it's happening also in these bigger firms. And yes, it's harder. It's harder if they're publicly listed. It's harder if they are really big companies that are spread out across the globe. Yeah, it just makes it harder, but that doesn't mean it cannot happen. And we're seeing this in some really big companies with 10,000 employees or tens of thousands, or like Haier, up to 80,000 employees.
Yes,
so it can be done, but it is very challenging to get it right, and it takes many, many years to get there.
Imagine you're talking now to a founder or a CEO of an organization that is experimenting this space, and many of them are strong, and a number of them worked closely with some of these founders, very strong, powerful individuals. What are the biggest shifts in their mindsets and practices they need to make this model work?
Yeah, it is a really challenging one for leaders to unlearn a couple of things that they've probably learned being in that position of a founder or CEO of a company. So letting go is something that they really have to do, but also really struggle with in many cases. But there is a bit of I just had just finished a conversation about this topic here in the office with one of our customers. It's like, it's one of the paradoxes in these types of leaders. So if people have supported a company through such a transition, have some character traits that are very contradictory. So on the one hand, they're very much okay with trusting other people and letting go over certain parts of the business. But for some other things, and mainly when it comes to values and the purpose of the organization and the mission, then some of these things are completely non-negotiable. So they are very stubborn when it comes to, for example, certain values.
Yes.
And that's where they really say, okay, this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. So that's very, and when it then comes to, for example, how they run their business, how decisions are made, or more operational side of the business, then they are very much okay with letting go and giving other people the space to step up. So there is, I think, a bit of contradiction there. On the one hand, they're very stubborn in certain areas, and then the other, they're quite flexible and let other people come up with solutions and ideas.
Continue to think about transitions towards this. What's the one biggest mistake people make, and what's the biggest myth you hear about and get frustrated by?
I think they're closely connected. So I think one of the biggest myths is that companies with no hierarchical structures are companies with no structures. So many people assume, there's no hierarchical structure, there are no bosses, no top-down decision-making mandates. That means that a self-managed company or non-hierarchical company doesn't have any structure and any process. But that's completely false, because I would argue that these self-managed companies often have more clarity around processes and structures than hierarchical companies do. But it's a totally different type of structure. It's not top-down, but it's peer-to-peer. But there is, people need this clarity, especially in an organization like this, where you can't just wait for your boss to tell you what to do or what to focus on. You have to figure that out for yourself. And then it's very important that there is a lot of clarity in terms of what is the purpose of the organization? What are our values? How is work being distributed? What are the roles that I pick up? What are the roles that others are responsible for? So there's a lot of clarity around how these companies work, especially if they work like this on a bigger scale. And you need it as well, because otherwise it's too easy to end up in chaos and anarchy.
Yes. Let's get specific now then. You're working day in, day out with these organizations. Just pick one that you think, wow, David, I'm massively impressed with what they're doing right now. Who would it be?
Well, there's a couple of them, but some are really hard to explain how they work and how they operate. So it's less inspiring. That's why I many times always go back to the story of buurtzorg. It's a Dutch healthcare organization employing.
We know that one. We know that. And I'm being cheeky. You carry on. God, the listeners may not, but it's a great, great story.
Yeah, it's beautiful. 15,000 employees work for the organization, and there's not a single manager to be found. So there's two people who are the directors, and then there's more than 1,000 self-managed teams.
Amazing.
Who take care of everything themselves. So these teams consist of 10 to 12 nurses, and they are responsible for hiring, onboarding, firing, planning their work, executing their work. And they are, as a team, fully responsible for all of that. And there's nobody else telling them what to do, no managers in that entire organization. And they are outperforming their competitors on nearly all metrics. So they are more cost effective, employees are more engaged, their customers are more satisfied. So it shows the power of self-management. And I think the beauty with buurtzorg is that it's quite easy to explain and for people to understand.
Yeah, well, you did it brilliantly. I was being cheeky. You did it brilliantly. In that model, or more generally, how do those teams benefit from, if you like, scale economies from using support functions, whether it's technology, HR, and so on, where frankly every individual one could pick their own system and so on, and that may work for them in terms of their customization, but they may not get the best deal. How does it work in that specific example?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that they centralize. So one is the IT infrastructure. So, and this is really important for them because it's this network organization of more than 1,000 teams. And it's important that these teams are also able to share knowledge. Because if one team runs into a problem with a certain patient and they have no clue how to deal with it, then there's a big chance that any of the other 1,000 teams have already solved this problem before them. So the IT platform is very important for them. It's kind of like a social media platform where they can easily connect to other teams. They can post their challenge or their problem, and then other teams can step in and support them. So this is one of the things that they centralize. And then also, for example, contracting with insurance companies is something that's also centralized. But they do make sure that the centralization is only the bare essential things, and they don't want to centralize too much. Always their default is to decentralize unless there's a really, really good way, reason to centralize things.
Yeah, it's the defaults again. That's brilliant. What's at the frontiers of management practice in this field. What are you looking at right now and saying, look, this is really, really early days. I'm really fascinated by. Give us a sense of what you're looking at.
Yeah, the next step I feel, so let's say traditional businesses with hierarchical structures, and then you have pretty radical already, I would say, self-managed companies, so non-hierarchical organizations. I think the next frontier is the combination of a self-managed company with new ownership structures. Because traditional ownership structures, they are not very compatible with self-management, or they are. You can use them at the same time, and most self-managed companies do. But once you kind of mature in self-management and you really see that people step up, they take ownership, and they really are what brings value to the organization, and everything's very distributed, then it doesn't make sense to have a centralized ownership structure anymore.
Yes.
And therefore, we're seeing a move into either more employee-owned businesses, but I think even a step further, because employee ownership is nothing new. But I think the next step in that is what they call steward ownership. And without going into too much technicalities, that's an ownership structure where everything's about the mission and not about benefiting shareholders. So what you do in a steward ownership structure, to put it very simple, is you separate decision-making power from financial benefit. So you can have investors in a company and they can benefit financially, but they don't have any decision-making power over how the company is run. That's up to the employees or the certain stewards of the organization to decide. So that's kind of to grow into a new kind of capitalism.
Yes. It's
That's
a
bit
higher level, isn't it? It's a bigger system play, and it requires huge amounts of trust as well. I mean, to do what you to pull it off. But we're talking about a level up in terms of impact and purpose, aren't we?
Yeah, and then the companies can kind of legally ensure that and safeguard that the mission comes first and not the shareholders and their profit.
Brilliant. Look, you have achieved already an incredible amount in a relatively short life. Take that as a compliment. What are your superpowers?
I think one of the things that people like about what we write is that we can simplify many of the things we're seeing. So we love to dive deep into these companies, but then I think the challenge is how can you make it understandable and also interesting for people to read. So I think that's one of the things that we've done quite. We don't talk. Well, maybe if maybe I've done so in this talk a little bit, but we don't like to use much jargon or language that is unfamiliar to people not in this space. So I think that really helps. I think just us trying to make it simple for people to understand is a big reason of why a lot of people like to read the stuff that we put out there.
I agree. What's your biggest weakness?
Trying to do too many things at the same time. So I think this is a challenge that many entrepreneurs are struggling with. I get excited about things really quickly. And that also means that it can be really hard to say no. So I have always these periods where at one point I'm doing too many things and I have to say no to a couple to come back and focus on a couple of things and do them really well.
And how would you describe your own organization in terms of its maturity and performance against other self-managed organizations?
Ups and downs. Yeah, we're doing all of that crazy stuff that we've been talking about. So peer-based salaries. But we're a small company, right? So just 7 people. So that's a very easy thing to do. But then still you struggle in some phases, you struggle much more than in others, where it's always the personal aspect of it. So people to learn how to solve their own conflicts, give each other direct feedback, let others know if they don't like how something is done. That's really hard for people to do, even if you've been working in a self-managed company for a longer period of time. Yes. But especially if we have new people joining the team, there's always this challenge of getting them up to speed and making sure they can develop themselves in these areas as well.
And at a more philosophical level, higher level, what is the impact you're looking to have on the world around you from your work?
We want as many companies as possible to start working in a more progressive way. Because, there's there's so many things going wrong in the world at the moment. I think we're all aware of them. And I think a big chunk of that also comes down to how we organize work. People are caught in frustrating workplaces for a very big chunk of their time. And if we can turn this around, and we're seeing this in practice at the companies who have been able to transform, if you can see the people develop themselves, find their passions, do something that they really believe in, and can kind of create their own ideal job and personal development journey, I think this has ripple effects way beyond work. If they go home happy with their workday, they come and see their families, and they're much happier, and it has a ripple effect on them. It inspires other people to live a better life. So I think these kinds of things is what we're looking for. With Corporate Rebels, it's a bit more abstract because we share a lot of research and hope that people start implementing things based on that. And with Chrysos, where we actually see these transformations happening in real life, here it's much more tangible. And I think the two go well hand in hand, where one, we have the platform to reach a lot of people on a more inspirational and also a bit of practical level, but then we actually show how we can put it into practice with this private equity company, and then use that again to amplify the story and show to people that there is another way.
Nice virtuous cycle. And when you're having your best day, you're not overwhelmed, you're not doing too much, you're really focused, everything's going swimmingly. What helps you the most in doing that, in terms of whether it's your mindsets or your personal practices?
For me, the best thing to do, and this comes back maybe a bit to that challenge that I mentioned, is really blocking time to work on certain things and cut off all the noise, and then just focus on one really important task for that day, and just put my head down for 3-4 hours, make sure it's finished by then, and then go on to do something new or different. But I think this is, for me, it's always a challenge as well, because when lots of new initiatives pop up, this gets lost, and then I have to refocus again. And then blocking the time for certain activities, for me, is always the thing that I have to go back to.
Wonderful. As we draw to a close in what has been, I have to say, a very stimulating, enriching conversation, I really enjoyed spending time with you. What would be your one message to somebody on the edge, on the cusp of moving into this space? What would you say to them?
Well, let me make it two. One, start looking at what these companies are actually like. If you learn about the stories of Buurtzorg and any of the 200 other companies we've been visiting over the past couple of years, you will get inspired. I'm 100% sure. If you see what these companies are doing and the effect it has on their business and on their people, it will inspire you, 100% sure. And then the next thing to do is try to put one thing into practice. Experiment with something even as small as changing your meeting structure or distributing roles in your team. There is just one small thing you can do to kind of get a feel for what it could be if you go further down this path. Because I think that's where this gets really interesting. Inspiration is nice, but then putting it into practice and seeing that it can actually benefit you and the people you work with most closely, then it really becomes a powerful thing that can then build up and up over time.
That's super practical. That's super positive. What an uplifting conversation. When people want to read more about your work, join one of your masterclasses, perhaps create their own movement, where should they go online to find out more about you and your colleagues and work?
Yeah, the easiest thing is just to go to corporaterebels.com or Google Corporate Rebels, and then you'll find everything that we have on our website. If you want to dive deep into these progressive companies, we have a 6-week masterclass that it's our highest rated program. We really dive deep into some of these case studies, including the one on Buurtzorg that we talked about. It's a really good starting point for people to dive really, really deep into this and learn how they can put it into practice.
There you go. This is important work. This is important work for organizations, for the employees within it, but also society. This has a deeper purpose. So I applaud you, your colleagues, Juice, and everyone else for doing it. And thank you for a wonderful conversation, Pim. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me.